All right. Ready to dive into the world of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Let's do it.
This guy's been a fixture in Israeli politics for decades. Seems like he's always in the headlines.
Yeah, he's a hard one to ignore, that's for sure.
And this biographical piece we're looking at, it really gets into the nitty-gritty, you know?
Hmm.
Goes way beyond just the surface level. Like, did you know they call him Mr. Security?
I've heard that. I mean, given his track record, leading Israel through multiple conflicts, it kind of makes sense.
Right. But like you said, there's always more to uncover.
Oh, absolutely. His story, it's practically woven into the fabric of Israel's history, especially some of their most pivotal moments.
And what I find fascinating is, yeah, his focus on national security, that's a constant. But the way he's gone about it, the methods, the strategies, even who he's chosen to be allies with, it's all constantly shifting.
Like he's walking this crazy political tightrope, trying to maintain balance, but always with these incredibly high stakes.
So let's go back to the beginning. His younger years. You wouldn't necessarily expect this from someone so closely associated with Israel, but Netanyahu's early life, it was surprisingly international.
Totally. I mean, born in Israel, yes, but he spent some really formative years in the United States.
Yeah, and not just like a quick visit. He went to high school in Pennsylvania, even honed his debate skills there.
Which you can imagine, that kind of early exposure to American culture, American politics, it leaves a mark.
Yeah.
Probably shaped his worldview in ways we can only guess at.
It's like the seeds of diplomacy were planted way back then. And then, of course, there's his military service.
We can't gloss over that.
No. Definitely not. And not just any unit. We're talking the elite Sayeret Matkal. Saw action in multiple conflicts. So this wasn't some cushy assignment.
Not at all. And in Israel, military service, it's not just a line on your resume, you know. It carries real weight in their society.
Shows you're willing to put your life on the line.
Exactly. And his record, especially in those elite units, it instantly gives him credibility, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is someone who understands security threats, understands the risks, because he's lived them.
Definitely adds to that whole Mr. Security image. But here's where things take a turn, and I mean a big turn. After the military, Netanyahu could have had a completely different life.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
He goes to MIT, gets into architecture and business, even starts working on his doctorate at Harvard.
Wow. Professor Netanyahu. It's kind of wild to think about.
Right. But it shows you this other side of him, right? The ambition, the intellect. This is a pattern we see throughout his life. Whatever he puts his mind to, he excels at.
And that just makes his decision to go into politics all the more intriguing.
Yeah.
What makes someone make that kind of leap?
And this biography, it doesn't shy away from the fact that his shift into politics, it's deeply connected to personal tragedy. The death of his brother, Jonathan Netanyahu, during Operation Entebbe.
Yeah, that was a defining moment for him, for sure, a real turning point.
It's like this event, this loss, it pushed him away from academia and towards a path focused on, well, diplomacy and international relations. His focus narrowed.
Losing his brother, who was already considered a national hero, it had this profound impact on him, on his worldview. You see this unwavering commitment to national security emerge, but it's also where his political ambitions really start to solidify.
And he doesn't waste any time. He starts climbing those political ranks first. He's got positions in the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., building connections.
All part of the plan.
Then he becomes Israel's ambassador to the United Nations.
A crucial role.
Yeah.
Think about it. He's suddenly face-to-face with global leaders every single day.
Yeah, this wasn't some behind-the-scenes job. He was thrust right into the spotlight.
He was learning the ropes, making connections, and probably making some enemies along the way, too. It's all part of the game.
And then it's Likud time. Now, for those who need a refresher, Likud, it's one of Israel's major political parties, known for its right-wing stance.
Right, so we're talking about a very particular ideology, a very particular approach to politics.
And what's interesting is that Netanyahu, he becomes the leader of Likud after they lose an election.
No, that's how you make an entrance. Talk about a power move.
It really is. Not the way most people climb to the top.
No, it's not. But it speaks to his ambition, his ability to seize an opportunity, even in the face of what others might see as defeat.
He sees an opening and he goes for it.
And pretty soon after, boom, he becomes the youngest ever prime minister of Israel.
It's a meteoric rise, no doubt. But becoming prime minister in Israel, it's not like you suddenly have all the power, right? The biography makes it clear, to get things done, Netanyahu's had to master the art of coalition building.
Oh, absolutely. That's Israeli politics in a nutshell.
So walk me through that a bit. What does that actually look like?
Okay, so you've got the Knesset, their parliament. To get a majority to actually pass legislation, you usually need to form alliances with multiple parties.
And these aren't always parties that see eye to eye on every issue.
Rarely. Each party, they come with their own set of priorities, their own demands. It's a balancing act, for sure.
And Netanyahu, from the get-go, he had a knack for this.
Oh yeah, a real pro. He could negotiate, he could compromise, but he also knew how to hold his ground when it really mattered.
And this is all happening against the backdrop of some pretty major historical events. I mean, we're talking about the Oslo Accords.
Right, which were hugely significant, but also incredibly controversial.
And our biography, it doesn't shy away from the fact that Netanyahu, he had some serious reservations about those agreements right from the start.
He did. Initially, he was a very vocal critic of the Oslo Accords. He even participated in rallies against them.
Wow, he was out there on the front lines.
Oh, yeah. He believed that the Accords, they made too many concessions to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, without getting enough security guarantees in return for Israel.
Which, given his whole Mr. Security image, kind of makes sense.
It's consistent, for sure. But here's the thing about Netanyahu. His stance on the peace process, it wasn't static. It evolved, shifted over time as he gained more experience, more time in the hot seat.
So did he eventually come around on the peace process?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He's often described as a pragmatist, someone who understands that negotiation is necessary.
Right, you can't just stick your head in the sand.
Exactly. But at the same time, he's also seen as someone who's not willing to compromise on what he views as Israel's fundamental security interests. So it's this constant tension, this back and forth.
Walking that tightrope again. Trying to keep everyone happy, but knowing that's almost impossible.
And that's where those 3 no's come in. They became a defining part of his approach to the peace process, almost like a mantra for his government.
The 3 no's.
Yeah. No withdrawal from the Golan Heights. That's the strategically important plateau we talked about earlier.
Right.
No negotiations on the status of Jerusalem.
Always a sticking point.
Huge. A city sacred to both Israelis and Palestinians. And finally, no preconditions for talks with the Palestinians.
So basically, he was drawing a line in the sand. These are our non-negotiables.
Exactly. He was setting the terms, making it clear what he was, and wasn't willing to put on the table.
A bold move. And it wasn't just in the realm of diplomacy where he took this kind of stand. I mean, the biography talks about his economic policies and how they were, well, how do I put it? They sparked some debate.
That's one way to say it. Yeah, his economic policies, they were definitely a mixed bag, depending on who you ask.
Right, because on the one hand, you have this period of significant economic growth in Israel. They even called it the Israeli economic miracle.
And it wasn't just hype. There was real growth, real progress, but it came at a cost, or at least that's how some people saw it.
And that's the other side of the coin. The biography mentions concerns about rising income inequality during this time and the impact that had on, social safety nets, the people who rely on those programs to get by.
It's a common critique of what are often called trickle-down economics. And Netanyahu, having spent time in the U.S., he was definitely influenced by that school of thought. He championed free market principles, deregulation, privatization, the whole 9 yards.
And it did attract foreign investment, right? Boosted their tech sector.
Absolutely. So for some, it was a boom time. But for others, those who were already struggling, it felt like the gap was just getting wider.
The rich get richer. It's a tale as old as time. But okay, so we've got this complex picture emerging, right? Netanyahu, the diplomat, the security hawk, the economic reformer. But then there's this other aspect to his career that we can't ignore, the scandals.
Yeah, those are impossible to ignore. They've followed him around for years.
And the biography doesn't shy away from them. It goes into detail about these multiple allegations of corruption, bribery, breach of trust. I mean, I'm not even that deep into Israeli politics, and I remember those headlines.
They were hard to miss.
There were accusations about him accepting really lavish gifts from these wealthy donors, using his position to enrich himself, even trying to control the media, make himself look good.
It was a lot to process. And it's important to remember, in all of this, Netanyahu has always maintained his innocence.
Right. He's never actually been convicted of a crime.
Exactly. These cases, they've dragged on for years, and his supporters, they often dismiss them as nothing more than politically motivated attacks.
But still, even without a conviction, all those accusations, they have to take a toll, don't they?
You think so?
I mean, how do you square that with his incredible political resilience? This is a guy who's managed to stay in power for, well, it feels like forever.
He's a survivor, that's for sure. And I think part of it is he has this uncanny ability to connect with a very specific segment of voters.
His base.
Exactly. They see him as the ultimate defender of Israel's security. And he's a master communicator, especially when it comes to framing these complex geopolitical issues in a way that really resonates with them.
So when those scandals hit, his supporters, they saw it as what? An attack on the man who was keeping them safe.
In a way, yeah. There's this belief among his base that he's playing this high-stakes game, dealing with existential threats, and that sometimes you have to bend the rules a little to protect what matters most.
It's us versus them mentality.
To some extent, it is. And you have to hand it to him. He's weathered those storms time and again, until, perhaps, this most recent conflict with Hamas.
Yeah, this one feels different, doesn't it? It's interesting because the biography we're discussing, it ends before this latest conflict breaks out.
Talk about bad timing.
I know, right?
Uh,
But even still, you get the sense that things are building towards a major confrontation.
the seeds are there, absolutely. And the Hamas conflict, it's always been this defining issue for any Israeli prime minister. Netanyahu's no different.
He's been criticized a lot for his handling of it, though, hasn't he?
Oh, for sure. Some people, they say he's too quick to resort to military force, that he doesn't explore other options enough. While others, they praise him for his, quote-unquote, unwavering commitment to protecting Israeli citizens from those rocket attacks.
So it's a no-win situation.
Pretty much. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And this latest conflict, it's just brought all those criticisms to the surface, magnified them.
And it's not just pressure from the outside, right? We've seen those images, the protests in Israel. People are questioning his judgment, his leadership. This isn't just some political game anymore.
It's definitely gotten personal. Those protests, they highlight these deep divisions within Israeli society.
Yeah.
And they're divided on multiple levels. I mean, there's the conflict itself, how it's being handled, and what a path forward even looks like. It's complex.
It's like everything we've been talking about, his political maneuvering, that laser focus on security, even his ability to just kind of shrug off those scandals, it's all coming to a head. And it's interesting, the biography, it ends with this sense of, like, Netanyahu is facing his biggest challenge yet, which, knowing what we know now, it feels kind of eerie, right?
Totally. Like they could see it coming.
Yeah.
And look, there's no denying it. This is a critical turning point, not just for Netanyahu, but for the whole region.
Right. This isn't just about one man's career anymore.
Exactly. His whole career has been about navigating these incredibly delicate situations, making decisions with huge consequences. But the stakes, they just keep getting higher.
And the potential for things to really unravel, to spiral out of control, that feels very real right now. It feels different this time, like we're witnessing this major shift, not just in Netanyahu's story, but in the entire region.
That's history in the making, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're watching it unfold in real time. We can analyze the past, try to make sense of the present, but the future, it's full of possibilities.
And as observers, it's on us to really engage with all of this, the good, the bad, the complexities,
To look at it from all angles.
and to never stop asking those tough questions.
Exactly. Because the answers, they're not always clear-cut.
Absolutely. And that's what we try to do here on The Deep Dive. Get people thinking, get people talking.
Start a conversation.
So as we wrap up this look at this life and career of Benjamin Netanyahu, the one question I keep coming back to is this. Will he, as he's done so many times before, find a way to hold on to power? Or is this the beginning of the end for Mr. Security? What do you think?
Honestly, I wish I had a crystal ball. It's the question everyone's asking. And unfortunately, we're going to wait and see how it all plays out.
It's a cliffhanger for sure, but I think one thing's for certain, whatever happens next, it's going to have a ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely. This is far from over.
So for all of you listening, keep digging into this story, keep asking those tough questions, and keep forming your own conclusions. Because as we've seen today, the life and career of Benjamin Netanyahu, they're anything but simple. And the final chapter, well, it's still being written.